What's happening, Sports Rehab Expert Nation? This is Greg Chivey with sportsrehabexpert.com. Today we're here back at it with another case study. This is the Sports Rehab Success Show. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in again. This is the show where we teach you how to become the sports rehab expert in your area and succeed both clinically and professionally as a sports rehabilitation professional or as a strength and conditioning coach. Today's case study, what we're going to be talking about is a client that I had in my clinic, and this was a individual who's experiencing knee pain while squatting. This was going on for quite a long time. This was not your beginner squatter. This guy could squat well into 400 pounds. But the squatting, and he squatted 4 times a week. His pain was always at the transition point from the bottom coming back up. I've been dealing again with this for months. His training volume had to significantly be cut to eventually, when he had completely cut squatting out, that's when he reached out to me and came to see me. But it was very, very odd in the presentation, where some days he could lift perfectly fine. Other days he could not do any type of lifting, and then if you provoked the knee pain, it would cause a significant amount of pain for a couple days thereafter, and not allow him to train any type of movement for it. It always happened with squat. He could do lunges, he could do step-ups, he deadlifts. You know, he tried modifying completely around this activity before coming to see me, and he tried gradually exposing himself back into squatting as well too, and did a really good job of it actually. When I first met him, you know, he went through his own kind of rehabilitation. He went through the whole graded exposure type of process to return back to lifting and to squatting. So again, if you're listening to this as a rehabilitation professional, big thing out there online now is just, you know, calm the symptoms down, and then you got to rebuild the capacity back up again. But in this case, it certainly did not work, because he completely removed squatting out of his equation, just did lunges, just did step-ups, just did deadlifts, and he did that for a good month's period. And during that time, towards the end of the month, he was kind of gradually trying to get himself back into squatting, meaning he was he took it down even to going just barbell for a little bit, and then, you know, over the course of weeks and a month, taking that up to 135, and then he got up to 185, but then the symptoms started to return. And again, he did this over the course of 4 to 6 weeks of trying to really deload himself and then kind of build himself back up. And he was only squatting, you know, once or twice a week, so it really wasn't that heavy of a stimulus. Again, 185 compared to a guy who could squat 400 pounds was not that heavy of a weight for him. So obviously very frustrated at this point in time, doing what supposedly is the right thing to do, is just, you know, calm things down, build things back up. But it did not work in this case. And so he came to see me. We had to get a little bit more specific with what we were doing. This was not an easy case by any means. Initially up front, I struggled a little bit too with this one. I don't think I was necessarily in, because I kind of had that mindset actually too. I mean, that process does work for a lot of people, and I really tried to tease out of him what he was doing to see what we could do to gradually get him back to squatting, because a lot of just recreational lifters don't do a very good job of that. But in this case, he did everything he was supposed to be doing to kind of gradually expose himself back into squatting, and it just didn't work out. So I really made sure I teased that out kind of in the first couple visits, and that honestly was my strategy initially, was because he didn't have any positive you know, testing signs. You know, go through the McMurrays, you go through any type of meniscus testing, passive overpressure both in deflection and extension did not bother him. If we just loaded him in body weight squat, had no pain, could perform a step up through a large range of motion. You know, we went to an 18-inch box, and it was only when we started adding load that his pain started to present. So he did have pain with step ups. If we went with that really, really high step, kind of that position that would mimic more of the bottom of a squat, he did have pain at that position. So an 18-inch box with him kind of mimicked the same joint angle for knee flexion and hip flexion to start loading. And we got somewhere around, I think it was 30, 35 pound weights in either hand. So about 60, 70 pounds total for a single leg movement, which makes sense because when we went to the squat, again, 185 was what consistently caused him some problems. So, half of that, 70, 80 pounds whereabouts, that made sense there. So that was, again, where, okay, I thought maybe we had to get a little bit more specific with the joint angles, be more specific on if the angle of the shin made a difference with it. So if we manipulate the shin vertical, or if we allowed his knee to travel forward, did that change his pain? Which it did not. And the interesting thing about this case too is that it varied from day to day when he would come into the clinic. So initially I only saw him once a week in the clinic, and some days he could go through the workout just fine. Other days he had pain with it if we tried to get him up towards that type of loading. Again, the shin angle varying that did not make a difference. There's some things that I've done with other people in the past where you vary how you load through a little bit of rotation, where you get the glute a little bit more involved, so through some ipsilateral rotation to the stance leg. That loads the glute a little bit more, takes some pressure off the knee. Sometimes that decreases pain. There's some things that I've done in the past with tibial internal rotation and external rotation. Those type of manipulations where you kind of manipulate pressure through the patellofemoral complex, and a lot of times that can clear up some pain. Did not happen in this case. Again, it was anytime he squatted, anytime he got below parallel, because he squatted to full depth, and he's again avid lifter, but he had really good squat range of motion, no problem hanging out in the very bottom of a squat. And so I thought, let's just kind of go right up to the edge of things. We'll go through the range of motion of a squat that you do feel comfortable. We'll kind of hit the edge of it, and then we'll kind of build up through that. So we were very specific in the joint angles that we trained. With the squatting, we would kind of go just shy of what irritated him. And then with the step ups, because you tend to have a little bit more comfortability with the step up, we'd start underneath of that load which causes pain, go at the 18-inch step, which would mimic that joint angle, and then do some step ups and get some volume and let some progressive resistance training build up over time to where he could start loading that joint more and more and more. Now, at first, things seemed to go decently well. We could get up a little bit heavier in weight, both with these, more so with the step up and the lunges. We could get through a little bit more of that weight, and he was able to do that pain-free. But anytime we went back to squatting, same thing happened. He could have a couple days where it felt fine, but then another day, just randomly out of the blue, start irritating him again. And we really did not manipulate the load all too much. And we were monitoring load both within session and then total amount of load throughout the week. So we were really doing a good job of monitoring the load and kind of the progression that he took with this. It just did not seem to help him. And so that's where we had to take it a little bit of a step back, and it's like, okay, it's obviously this transition point that is bothering you. It doesn't matter which squatting variation we do. We could do a back squat, we could do a front squat, we could do a goblet squat. Goblet squat, not necessarily, because you could do that fine. The load wasn't heavy enough to cause him a problem. But again, it was another way of training kind of through that provocative range of motion. Same thing with step ups, try to mimic the joint angle as much as we could. But the one thing about step ups, when you start getting to that height of hip flexion, most people don't go through quite as much anterior translation of the tibia as what they would normally do with the squat. So it wasn't too, when you start getting up that high, it didn't relate too much to the joint position that is necessarily found in a squat. But with the lunge, like, we would try to emphasize the knee forward activity, because again, we want to try to mimic the joint angles that are going to be created with the squatting movement. And again, it was just really varied, really frustrating how it was so varied, how one day you could come into the clinic, not have any pain, not have any problem with the workout, and the next day, or the next time you'd come in, he would even say this too. He's like, it just doesn't feel good today. I feel like I'm going to have pain when it happens. That was another oddity of it. It was like some days he felt great and he felt wonderful. He just didn't feel any of that irritation to the knee. It was hard for him to describe, but it felt comfortable for him, and he would be able to train no problem. And then other days, again, he'd come in, say, just doesn't feel right. Didn't really have a great way of describing it, but it doesn't feel right. We try to go through loading, and then eventually when we top out around that 185 with the squat, again, cause some pain, or potentially even with the step ups. So what ended up making the difference with this case was the fact of going to some type of isometric. That isometric was a wall sit, and that wall sit was done at the specific point in time where he felt pain in the squat. Again, it was just body weight, so it really was not painful, but I had him, when he did the squat, I really wanted to make sure his knees were going forward over top of the toes. Sometimes when you see people do wall sits, they'll keep a vertical shin. And again, the purpose of this, in my mind, was to manipulate the position that was exactly the same as the squat, something that we couldn't really do too well with the lunge. Again, because the lunge is more of a split stance position, or a step up is more of a split stance position, single leg activity. So there's going to be some different loading. So I wanted to get as specific as we could to the actual movement and spend time in that position. Whereas before, when we were trying to do it, we were trying to build back up through a normal tempo, heavy, slow resistance, where it was a nice slow eccentric down with a goblet squat and then come back up at a normal pace. Same thing when we went to eventually a barbell and a front squat, and that again did not seem to work. So I wanted to spend more time at that bottom position for him and start doing that in a comfortable way. So he'd get more time and attention in the specific position that bothered him and do it in a comfortable way so that he could do it frequently. So there was a micro-dosing effect to this, where we wanted to make things comfortable so that he could provide that stimulus and do that stimulus at a frequent basis, and do it frequently enough that that was how he accrued volume, and not necessarily within session or over the course of the multiple sessions. That's not where the volume happened. The volume was very, very spread out through the week, but still accrued a lot of volume in that bottom position. So we started with 3 times 30-second holds with that bottom position, again, making sure the knees went forward in that wall set as opposed to a vertical shin, getting down to that specific depth that caused them some issue. When we initially started this, the third set of 30 seconds towards the end, he was feeling a hint of something, but he described it more as pressure than the actual pain. So again, told him to start performing this daily, and I wanted him to work up to 5 sets of 30 seconds, doing that daily. And then over the course of 2 weeks of him just doing that, just body weight, he started noticing a significant difference. He felt more confident. He said less days of feeling like that there was going to be some type of irritation to the knee. So we progressed it a little bit further by adding some load to the wall sit, where he started with 25-pound plates just to his thighs, eventually progressed up to a 45-pound plate. Again, 5 seconds, 30-second, or 5 sets of 30-second holds. We also started spending some time with the goblet squat down in that bottom position as well too. So 3-second pauses at the bottom position before coming back up, using lighter weights, and again spending more time in that bottom position where that would be the area that caused him pain, but doing so in a fashion or a load that did not cause him pain, and that he could do frequently throughout the week, so that he got frequent stimulus to the area and accruing volume that way. So over the course of, again, we probably did that for a month's time period. Then we went back into typical squatting movements with a barbell, and we did that with some loaded implements where we went with 135. We started just twice a week loading with 135, and then we built up to 185 twice a week. And then once that was fine, then it was we either manipulate adding another day of lifting in, or we would manipulate the weight going up. So we didn't do both. We didn't want to increase the weight and increase the amount that he trained the squatting pattern. We wanted to choose one type of variable to manipulate and make sure that went well for a week before we added in another variable. And that's just how we kind of continued back, because his goal was to be able to train the squat 4 times a week. And that's the type of volume that he wanted and needed to be able to train his squat for number purposes. Again, Guy could squat over 400 pounds, wants to get back up into squatting some heavy weight. We had to eventually get back up in that type of training volume, that type of training stimulus, and prepare him for that. So there's still some graded exposure that was necessary. But the big theme of this whole talk here is how we had to be really as specific as possible to that joint angle that was bothering him, and couldn't deload the activity completely to where it was pain-free and then gradually load it back up. We had to create a stimulus in a specific position of pain, and do so frequently, where there's that whole microdosing concept of doing a stimulus often, but not doing a heavy volume of it. The volume occurs over weeks. And that's where the adaptation starts to occur, starts convincing the body to maybe take the brakes off if it is extra sensitive, or the CNS is extra sensitive of the area. It also takes the brakes off of that through that repeated exposure, that repeated convincing that it's okay to go through that movement. There's not actual tissue damage or trauma that we're thinking of that is going to be an issue long term, because again, all special tests were negative. Full range of motion, passive overpressure in either direction has never been an issue for him. So we had to do something at that specific angle, and that's what seemed to get this individual the results that he was looking for. So hope you find that case helpful. If you're dealing with something currently that seems very similar to that issue there, if you're trying to squat some heavy weight and you just can't get back to doing it, feel free to reach out. We'd love to help you. If you're a rehab professional who is dealing with a lot of people who are squatting, or you'd like to get involved with more people who are that type of fitness enthusiast, who you want to have that type of client participation in your clinic, then sportsrehabexpert.com is the solution for you. Be sure to check it out, where we got courses, we got membership area, we got free blog posts, we got free audio interviews like this. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, share it if you felt it was helpful. We got the podcast, that Sports Rehab Expert Success Show, that is available on iTunes and any major platform. And then again, we got sportsrehabexpert.com. There's a lot of free material, but again, also courses courses and products that are helpful to help you become the go-to expert, whether you're a rehab professional or a strength and conditioning coach. So be sure to check those out as well. We'll be back at you next time. Everybody have a good one. Take care.